Chase, thanks so much for carving out the time. I know you are a busy man, a lot of movement and projects and interviews like this. And it's been a long time coming. I've always wanted to get a chance to chat with you and interview you, especially for this podcast, because you have a lot of opinions around the industry and what works and what doesn't. So thanks for taking the time out.
I appreciate you having me. And yeah, I definitely have got opinions.
No, they're good. I definitely remember getting a few laughs in on LinkedIn, just seeing some of your posts, especially around when you started with the deepfakes and you put your face on some movie
Yeah,
scene.
those were fun. Yeah.
There was one that particularly stood out. It was like, I think it was Ace Ventura. And it was you on Ace Ventura, and I just lost it. It's definitely been fun to watch and see your posts and get your insights on the industry chaos and things like that. Just in case there are listeners that don't know you, I'm sure most of the audience will, but you had a background in the military, in the Navy specifically, and we crossed paths at Forrester when you were there on a project that I was doing at a company I was working for. So would love to hear your path, and from obviously you did a PhD and things like that. So you want to take us through that path?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to join the military, was a cryptologist in the Navy, wound up doing a bunch of work for a bunch of three-letter agencies through a couple different programs that were available in the military. And then I was a civilian at the NSA for a little bit, contractor, that type of thing. And then I got over to Forrester, which was really cool, thanks to John Kindervag kind of referring and dragging me kicking and screaming over there. Which turned out to be a great career move. He was like, you need to do this. Okay, fine. So I did that. And I managed to finish up my degrees and my doctorate. And I've written 7 books right now. Number 8's off to editing. I don't know if there'll be a 9 because, man, I need a break from books. And then on top of that, I've got kids that are running around that hopefully will turn out to be reasonably useful human beings. So it's always something, foot to the floor, just trying to help where I can and do what I can for space that I think is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And speaking of books, I know I was listening to your podcast. Let's touch on that too. You have the Dr. Zero Trust podcast, and I subscribe to that. So one of the episodes you were talking about a sequel to Gabriel, and I thought that was cool. What's going on there?
Yeah, so Gabriel was just I wrote comics back in the day, the Sinja stuff with Heather, and she was awesome there. And then I seemed to be on a nonfiction kick for a while, writing like research books, which was cool. And then a few years ago, I just literally wanted to see, could I write a novel about cyber and AI and have it be not total trash? And it was intentionally short because I was like, if this is absolute garbage, then I don't want to spend too much of my time and effort writing it. But I had enough people come around after they read it and said, what's happening in the next one, that I just decided to start writing the next one. So I just recently sent that off to editing. It took me like 2 years to write it because it's way harder to write fiction than nonfiction. Everything has to come out of your head.
I guess you could chat GPT fiction as well if you wanted to, but
yeah, but then you're not writing it,
It's not, yeah. I'm sure people are doing that though. Hey, just pump out a fiction book for me, which brings me to another topic because, hey, this week was the craziest week I've seen when it comes to AI security. Starting on a Monday we had the DeepSeek release, Tuesday, the NVIDIA plunge and recovery stuff, and then Wednesday, the Alibaba release, and then Thursday, there were hackers successfully entering some of these LLMs. And then by Friday, there was another model released called, I can't remember the name of it, but it's so hard to keep up with all of this stuff going on, let alone the cyber implications of what's going on with AI. So probably not a better person to pick your brain on when it comes to the intersection of cyber and AI, and then not to mention the political landscape and the regulatory aspect, all converging right now into one on the Stargate last week. So there's been so much, and I would love to hear if you have a way for us to wrap our heads around this.
I think the most important thing that stands out to me, I was talking with some folks in working groups in the executive branch in Capitol Hill pretty recently this week. There's a much bigger geopolitical implication here with like nation state level stuff. Nothing happens in China in a vacuum. No one just decided to come up with this thing and built it and ran with it, whatever. I'm actually working on some research looking at the founders of DeepSeek and getting into where they came from and what they did. And it's interesting to see the party ties and how the Politburo's sitting there and that type of thing. And then the manipulation of the stock market, to your point about the NVIDIA stuff. I think that China and the organizations over there have done a really good job of kind of working the system against itself. because if your goal, the timing on this is what really stands out to me, right? So there's a new president in place. He's not necessarily friendly to China. Whether or not you like Trump or don't like Trump, I'm not a political animal. I could care less about any of them. But they're in office, and all of a sudden, oh, there's this new innovation comes out. It happens to engine in the United States economy for the last X number of months, and it starts to play its havoc on the world. And then we've got this whole issue of, gosh, those models certainly came from somewhere if they weren't created out of nothing, backdoors and et cetera. And then we're going to release an open source version of this, and it's getting installed in American companies and in the Pentagon, and it's 3D chess going on, and it's very concerning.
Yeah, and not to mention the pace of innovation can't really slow down on the business front or enterprise front in the US especially. So there's like this balancing act of releasing, because one of the things I've gotten lost in, it went down a rabbit hole last week, just access to these tools is amazing now. I'm a marketer. I was able to become a developer essentially just by using natural language commands and build an app within 20 minutes to 30 minutes. You can just write what you want and create an app, and it's out there. You can put it on the App Store within a day if you wanted. So that pace, and obviously that's not as fast in the enterprise level, but that pace of innovation now, how you can use AI to code and build and release software faster. Do you feel like we're heading into uncharted waters? Like we've never been in a place like this.
I think I would argue that I think we have been in a place where it's similar to this, but we're doing it at a speed and scale with a democratization of capabilities that is something we haven't seen before. We bumbled our way into the internet. I remember the first time I ever put my hands on a keyboard and was in a chat room way back in the 90s. So like we bumbled into that. Yeah. And then it was like, okay, this is cool. We could use this. And then all of a sudden it's a sea change. And then we did it again with AI and LLMs and whatever else, and we're staring down the barrel of that implication right now. And to your point earlier, so the locks are off the gate, and it's just the horse running through here. And we're not in a position legislatively, legally, economically, geopolitically to deal with the implications of what's going on here. It's the scope, speed, and scale, and the risk increase here is just through the ceiling.
It's interesting you say that, because the dot-com bubble did pop, right? That was like the early 2000s.
It popped hard.
But a few, like Amazon, survived that, and there were a few that held on. So I wonder if there is a parallel there, if the AI bubble is what we're now entering.
Oh, I totally
and we're
agree.
looking at this race to see.
Yeah, I think the bubble's here now. I think the interesting thing is going to be who survives when this bubble does burst, and then where it goes from here. OpenAI raising another chunk of money at another ridiculous valuation. And one thing that stood out to me is I was looking at doing some of this research for the folks I talked to on Capitol Hill. This whole thing is revealing an actual problem that we have at the financial level in the United States and globally, where the market is so easily manipulated now with tweets and with postings and whatever else. The house of cards is becoming a house of cards in front of a hurricane.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just this week was a prime example. One development on a Monday, and the whole NASDAQ was decreasing in points by a Tuesday. And so that does feel like .com era-ish, where we're in this territory.
$1 trillion of valuation lost in a day. You know what I mean? If that had happened 20 years ago, if we had lost $1 trillion of valuation, it would have been absolute chaos. But that also, I think, speaks to the lack of actual fiduciary responsibility in this market overall, because it didn't cause collapse. And so, wait a minute, we just lost $1 trillion and no one's really feeling it. That's an issue.
Yeah, the volatility, that's massively volatile. So it's scary to think about where we're headed. And I may or may not have bought a few NVIDIA shares last week. So I was
I'll tell you flat out, as soon as I saw the dip, I was like, buy that stuff.
Yeah. So I think, that's another theme I wanted to, let's just go into that. The buy the dip trend is something I've been watching, and your analysis, I think, was pretty spot on, where it seems like, it's pretty basic formula, right? Breach happens, stock goes down, buy.
Yeah. I did the research over a course of 10 years, and I looked at all the major companies that had been breached, and I looked at all the companies that had been breached that had 8K filings, and then I looked at their stock value prior to the breach, and I looked at their stock value 3, 6, 9, 18 months after they recovered from the breach. And every single one of them comes up double digits, like growth. So mathematically speaking, that means if you see them file an 8K, which they have to now by law if they're publicly traded, and you buy the breach, you're going to make money on the far end of it. There's no way to lose, which is a good thing in the stock market because you're always gambling. But here, and I have nothing to hold back. I put out every month, I put out my gains in the stock market based on buy the breach. And I'm up like 18%. Just keep on trucking.
Yeah, no, I've been watching that. I'm like, yeah, there's something.
I shared the code for the Google alert. Folks were wondering how to go off and do the research and find out. Look, here's the Google alert you can put in so that when an 8K is filed.
And that's one thing I wanted to ask you about too, is that ability to be open, transparent, because cyber is not known for that. Obviously, we're literally, the point of this industry is to guard secrets. And you're totally an open figure and saying there's that balance there for you that must be. I'm just curious, how did that develop for you? Because obviously, if you started this with saying 3-letter agencies, totally opposite, right? You're not allowed to say much at all. But now you're very open. So I'm curious, how did that transpire for you?
I think really the hit for me came when I was at Forrester and I saw all the interesting information that people were sharing inside of those closed circles. And I was just sitting there going, wait, why is this not available to anybody that would be able to look it up? And it wasn't even that any of that information was necessarily protected or secret. It's just you had to know how to go look for it and how to use that information. And not a lot of people are taught how to do good research. So for me, I just can't stand unfair fights, and I can't stand it when everybody's not getting a fair shake at things. So I'm just like, then I'll just level the playing field as best as I can. And if it helps somebody, great. If it doesn't, then that's whatever too. But there's none of the stuff that I put out there is protected or behind closed doors or hacker or whatever else. It's just because I happen to be blessed enough to have learned how to do good research and look for indicators and trends.
Is that what your research for your PhD programs? What was the main topic area?
I worked on insider threat, and I built a model. Actually, this was it's a small language model a long time ago that would predict when someone was getting ready to steal your intellectual property based on their email attributes and the way that they were actually talking with people. So it was a pretty cool model. It was like 94% accurate over time. But it was also creepy because you were able to go look at what people were saying and come back and be like, this dude's about to steal your stuff.
So
predictive and modeling and looking at stuff going forward. And I based it off of being able to do a really comprehensive onboarding session with an employee, asking them questions that I actually pulled from research on serial killers and modified for this particular purpose. Yeah.
Because you're predicting threats in that field, obviously. So it's similar. Translates.
If you have enough, if you have data points, you can eventually get a trend. And there's never 100% solution. But when you're talking, like to your point, when you're talking about protecting information, if it's 80%, then I should act.
Yeah, there's like that threshold where you have a confidence level. I'm not sure how it works, and you always watch these movies, and they're like, "How sure are you?" And they're like, 94%. All right, that's good enough.
Right. What's your threshold for action? It's interesting because if you're dealing with folks that do kinetic work, their threshold is much lower than if it's someone that's doing non-kinetic work. They're willing to be like, if it's not 95% or better, I'm not doing it.
Wow. You would think it'd be the opposite because the impact would be greater on the kinetic side.
Yeah, I was talking with some folks that were around when the decision was made to go after bin Laden in Pakistan, and they were like, what's the certainty level? And they said 50-50. That's it.
I think that's the movie I was thinking of.
Dark 30.
They had that whole scene where, yes, Zero Dark. You should do a meme, Zero Trust 30. If you don't, after this, I'm going to do that. And if I have your permission, I'll post it.
But yeah, I talked to a person that was included in some of those planning sessions, and it was like the CIA people were like 50-50, as good as we can get.
Wow. So they were like, wow, 50-50.
It was one of those ones of, it's 50-50, but there's also a lot of, it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, so it's probably a duck.
That reminds me, I think there was that Baltimore incident where the ship took the bridge down last year or 2 years ago. And you had that Navy background and you were posting about how, I can't remember exactly, but do you want to, I don't know, you had this insight into that I think few other people had, where
Yeah.
it was like, that just doesn't either just doesn't happen, or what was the
Well, it was
background there?
immediately when it happened, all the conspiracy theorist weirdos were like, oh, this was somebody hacked the system and changed these controls and it was blah, blah, and whatever else. And say, hang on, man, buckle up. Like, here's how maritime navigation works, especially in a shipping channel. Is it possible theoretically that someone did some crazy Machiavellian 0-day thing and changed settings and whatever? Sure. Is it more likely, though, that it was a confluence of events where things went horribly awry and bad stuff happens when you're navigating a giant ship out of a narrow channel at night? Probably more likely.
Yeah, that's what I remember. And that's another interesting story, but it relates somewhat to the initial start of this conversation around the stuff happening with AI. And some of this is just happening so fast that it's hard to imagine all the, like you said, these conspiracy theorists and everything else. Maybe it's just that's how fast we're moving now, and things are breaking, and it's just a natural consequence of things. And there's really no grand scheme. Nobody is that smart to put all these pieces together.
I always like it when I see like relatives of mine that are into conspiracy theory stuff, and I'm going, look, man, I worked in the government for a long time. You're giving them way too much credit. Like
way too much credit. Yeah. Yeah, there's nobody up there doing.
They're not good enough.
These master plans together.
We can't approve healthcare for people that need healthcare. We can't get veterans housing. Like you think we can come up with drones that are maglev, whatever?
Yeah, and you have that petition. So what's that about? Do you have a petition going, or had one
it's still
going?
Out there.
Tell us.
Yeah, so I've been trying to help promote basically better ways to address the cybersecurity issues that we face at the national level, because we just have failed categorically to do it. And it's not for lack of effort of the people that were in place, but I think that there's a time for change, and whether or not people like the new administration. And again, I'm not a political person. I'm just saying there's an opportunity for change. So I was putting the petition out there to basically try and get a seat at the table, because if you get enough people to sign a petition, you can get the interest of congressmen and senators, and they'll let you come do a formal, like, recorded briefing, not a closed door session. And that's a good way to get in front of them and say, look, here's what's wrong. Here's the legislation that you're putting out that's not going to help, and here's the right way to do it, and go forward from there.
And I assume the right way, your zero trust principles, like everything that you've been about.
And I have documentation I wrote up that's sitting around ready to go in front of those folks about the definition of negligence, the cyber tax credit stuff that I think we should put in place. There's a better way to do this, and we need to do it, because a risk that we can't continue to deal with this the way that we are.
How many signatures do you have?
I think I've got close to 200 on there, but it's one of those ones of the more the merrier. That's the other thing about social media, right? It was looked at nearly 100,000 times, but only a few hundred people signed it. Yeah. If you're going to look, go sign it.
It's like 2% or something like that. Yeah, everyone watching, get in there, give it a signature.
I'll collaborate with anybody that's willing to go up there and chat. I would hope that if it gets critical mass, we can get some people up there that are not the typical Patagonia vest, VC, Silicon Valley people that are just trying to ferment their own interests. I'm not there to talk about money and earnings. I'm there to talk about.
Yep. I would think, given your reputation, the amount of people in the industry, there could be some other people that get involved, and we got to try to promote this thing. The other thing I wanted to touch on, and maybe we can switch gears here a little bit, your time at Forrester, right? So you had exposure to, I don't know how many vendors a day. You were on all those calls that I'm on the other end on a lot, right? That must have been quite the learning experience, because you're seeing how entire categories and the leaders of those categories and the new entrants are presenting their wares, making their case, trying to convince you that something is a viable technology. What did you learn about what works, what doesn't, what to be aware of? I'd love to hear. We would all probably love to hear that.
Yeah. So advice for startups is don't go running to try and get coverage in an analyst report, because you're probably not ready, and it's probably not going to go the way that you want. And then you're going to have to explain to the investors and board why you didn't get what you thought you should get based on a $50K investment for a readership seat. That's one that stands out. Noteworthy too is that you should be doing as much research on the analyst as the analysts are doing on you and your company, because the ones that came where they knew the analyst background, they understood their views on technology, they'd read their research on those types of things, they had a way better interaction. And at the end of the day, you also have to remember that these analyst firms, like they're a business. So there's going to be a business requirement for them as well. At least be able to understand the chessboard that you are dealing with.
Yeah. And did you see any successful examples of, so say you were to do a briefing today with Forrester and you were to go in there, like just don't, make sure you don't do this because this is like an instant way to fail.
Yeah, if you're doing briefings, you've got 30 minutes. Don't spend 17 minutes talking about backgrounds of the folks on the company and whatever else, and then give me 5 minutes of product and then whatever else. If you go, make sure that you're ready to roll with a demo, with the product, with a briefing that matters, and then have plans for next steps. I hate to break it to the folks, but the analysts don't care about where your people came from or the 15 exits they had before or how many Ferraris they've got or whatever. It didn't matter. I want to see your product and whatever. And I got to where there was times where I would be on with folks and we'd be 15, 20 minutes into a call. And I just tell them flat out, look, we're not getting anywhere. This is not going to go. So let's just call it. You guys can try again. And then the other thing that's really good to know too is if you're dealing with an analyst report, like an evaluative report, and things don't come out the way that you were planning on it, by all means, don't go scorched earth like first approach, like calling the analyst names and sending nasty grams and threatening to sue and stuff like that. Because it just is, number one, it's childish and unprofessional. And number two, it's not going to make somebody go, oh gosh, I should really go back and reevaluate these people that called me an asshole. That's not going to work.
Scorched earth, probably not a good strategy in that case. Just come back to the game, like up your game and come back and live to fight another day.
For me, if somebody when I did waves, if somebody was like, look, we're not happy with our wave thing, I would always say, okay, let's do another call and let's see if there's stuff to reevaluate and change here. But I've also had C-suite leadership from Fortune 50 companies where they like cussed me out on calls. I was like, sorry about your luck. Have a nice day.
Yeah, no, yeah. Bottom line, cut to the chase, no pun intended. Just start with maybe a quick background, but just get past that, get into the product. And that reminds me, you were also, I'm not sure if you're still involved. Is this G2 crowd? Is that?
Yeah, so I'm still doing work with G2 for security market research.
And a big part of that, from my understanding, is product demo related. Is that right? Making sure you have the ability to give people access, because if you put a form in front of it and you're trying to get them on the call with sales, that's like they're not even going to go and talk to you because they just want to see and get their hands on it.
G2 is good because all the information there is from end users. It's not from analysts, which the analyst is a different story. But the fact that you can get information from what an end user thinks about a particular piece of software, that's way more valuable, I would suggest, in many instances. If I'm going to go eat Mexican food, what's the first thing I do? I go on Yelp and look for Mexican food in my area. And then if it's got 4 stars, that's where I'm going.
Yeah, maybe read a few reviews. Yeah.
I think you make the value proposition off that, because if you get a marketing slick together and a bunch of analysts, there's ways to say something nicer about us and change this word to that word.
Yeah. And so product for you, product demos, actually getting them into the tool, probably number one from a buyer's journey perspective, and then looking at it.
I think you should meet the buyer where they are today. Yeah, it's always funny to me because people pay this big money for Gartner and Forrester, but when you look at it, like Gartner, I think it was 70% of buyers don't want to talk to a salesperson until it's time to close a deal. But your first thing that you're going to do is have them talk to a salesperson. So you do the opposite and expect it to work.
Yeah. I think there's a term like called the dark funnel now, where it's buyers are well into all your messaging and products and demos and presentations before they will engage with someone, which makes sense. I do the same thing for everything. I'm not going to.
I just bought a new webcam today and I spent 2 days looking at research. I watched some YouTube videos. I read the reviews and then I went on Amazon and bought it. And now it's coming home. I didn't go to Best Buy because I don't want to talk to a teenager about it.
Exactly. Where I go in, I don't go in at all. It's and meet them where they are, I think, is the lesson there. So with just tying off on Forrester. So like you have the briefing aspect, and then how long were you there? You were there for a couple of years. I can't remember.
Almost 5 years. Yeah.
4 or 5 years. Okay. Do you think that there's a future in open source kind of analyst reviews, things like that, because G2 is really the I don't want to say the anti-analyst firm, but it's, hey, these are all these reviews where you can get access and read and understand what the products are about.
the analyst game, the legacy analyst game, where everything was behind a wall and a paywall and whatever else, and you had to pay for get access to that. I think that's going to continue for the big enterprises, but I think for everyone else, which is an exponentially larger pool, they're going to gravitate towards this model of asking the software, which is probably going to be an LLM that's going to talk to the data on the back end to help them with their research and figure that out. For me, like sitting on top of all the data at G2, it helps those of us that are still doing analyst work to have a really interesting viewpoint on what's going on within the data and trends themselves.
Right. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. Chase, really appreciate the time. I know you got a million things going on and really appreciate your insights today.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is fun.
All right, you got it.